I betrayed my own family, and honestly, they pushed me to it. My father is the most respected veterinarian in County Cork. My brother is the golden child who gets everything handed to him. And me? I'm the one they should never have tried to use. My name is Seamus O'Sullivan, and at 28, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. Growing up as the responsible son who worked 2 jobs through college while my younger brother Cillian got everything handed to him taught me plenty about unfairness. But my parents' plan to use me to pay his gambling debts crossed a line I never imagined they would cross. I grew up on a farm in County Cork, rural Ireland. My father, Dr. Padraig O'Sullivan, was the most respected veterinarian in the region, serving farms throughout the county for over 20 years. My mother Nuala sold her crafts at Clonakilty Market. From the outside, we were the perfect Irish family, stone farmhouse, green fields, and the most prestigious father in 3 towns. But inside those stone walls, reality was different. As the eldest son, I was always held to impossible standards. While my brother Cillian, 5 years younger, received everything handed to him, I worked from 16 at SuperValue in Clonakilty to have my own money. Seamus builds character working, my father would say, patting my shoulder. Cillian is still young, needs more attention. At 22, I moved to Dublin and started at Bank of Ireland. I worked like a condemned man, saving every euro, building my financial security. At 27, I bought my own apartment in Stoneybatter. Finally, I had something that was mine alone. Have you ever felt like your family sees you more as a resource than as a person? Like everything you achieve is just another opportunity for them to exploit? Tell me in the comments what you would do if you discovered your parents planning to use your hard work to bail out your siblings' gambling addiction. And if this sounds familiar, hit that subscribe button because you'll understand exactly why I did what I did. Throughout all those years, Cillian remained the golden child. College paid by parents, room at the farm, generous allowance. While I worked myself to death, he developed an online poker addiction that nobody knew about. It was at Nana Bridget's 70th birthday that I went back to the farm for the weekend. I arrived on Friday, expecting a normal family visit. In the early morning, going down for water, I heard voices in the living room. Cillian had arrived late, and my father was waiting up for him. "How bad is it?" I heard my father ask. "About $40,000 now," Cillian replied. The poker sites, credit cards, it added up faster than I thought. My blood froze. $40,000 in gambling debts. Don't worry, we'll make your brother pay for everything. I stood there in the hallway, listening to the most respected man in our community plan to exploit his own son. And I knew right then that I was done being their backup plan for Cillian's mistakes. I couldn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in that guest room, my childhood bedroom now stripped of every trace of who I used to be, listening to my father and brother plot my financial destruction like I was some ATM they could access whenever convenient. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. My mother joined them, and I learned she'd been part of this plan all along. They discussed approaching me with a family business opportunity, expanding Dad's veterinary practice with a new clinic in Bantry. They'd need my signature on a $40,000 loan, my credit rating, my financial stability to cover Cillian's gambling addiction. "Seamus always wants to feel included in family decisions," my mother said with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "He'll probably jump at the chance to finally be part of something important with us." They talked about me like I was desperate for their approval. Like I was some pathetic younger version of myself who still believed family meant something. The worst part? They weren't entirely wrong. Deep down, some part of me had always craved their recognition, their respect, their love. But that part of me died that night. Listening to the people who should have protected me, planned to use me instead. I spent the next few hours methodically planning my response. I opened my laptop and reviewed every financial account, every investment, every asset I'd built over the past 6 years. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let them destroy what I'd created for Cillian's poker addiction. By dawn, I had transferred most of my savings to accounts they didn't know existed. I called my bank's 24-hour security line and placed fraud alerts on everything. If they tried to manipulate me into signing anything, they'd find my finances locked down tighter than a vault. I packed my bag before anyone else woke up. left a note saying I had a work emergency, and drove back to Dublin. I needed distance to think, to plan, to decide how far I was willing to go to protect myself. The drive gave me 3 hours to process what I'd learned. My father, the man our entire community respected and trusted with their animals, was willing to financially destroy his own son to cover up his other son's addiction. My mother, who'd raised me to believe family came first, was ready to sacrifice my future for Cillian's comfort. When I reached my apartment in Stony Batter, I stood at the window looking out at Dublin, knowing my life had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just Seamus O'Sullivan anymore. I was the family member they'd underestimated, the son they'd try to exploit, the brother who was about to show them what real betrayal looked like. The respected veterinarian's family was about to learn that the responsible son they'd taken for granted had become someone they should have feared. The calls started on Monday morning. First, my mother wondering why I'd left so suddenly, then my father asking about my work emergency. I let them go to voicemail, needing space to execute my plan properly. I spent that week systematically protecting every aspect of my financial life. I met with Fiona Gallagher, my financial advisor at Bank of Ireland, and explained that I suspected family members might attempt to access my accounts or pressure me into co-signing loans. "This is more common than you'd think," she told me, her expression serious. "Financial abuse within families accounts for billions in losses every year. We'll implement additional security protocols immediately. We changed passwords, added verbal verification codes, and removed my parents as emergency contacts on everything." I also consulted with Seamus McBride, a Dublin attorney who specialized in financial protection and family fraud prevention. "Document everything," he advised. "If they approach you with this business proposition, record the conversation if legal. The more evidence you have of their intentions, the stronger your protection." By Wednesday, I felt secure knowing my assets were protected, but I knew the real test was coming. My parents wouldn't give up easily, and they'd definitely approach me soon with their fake investment opportunity. The call came on Thursday evening. My father's voice was warm, friendly, the tone he used when he wanted something. "Seamus, son, your mother and I have been discussing an exciting opportunity. We're thinking about expanding the practice, opening a second clinic in Bantry. It would serve the Western farms better, really grow the business." I kept my voice neutral. "That sounds ambitious." "It is, and that's where we'd love your input. You understand finance better than anyone in the family. We were hoping you might consider being a partner in this venture." There it was. The setup. I could almost see him practicing this conversation with my mother and Cillian. "What kind of partnership are you thinking?" I asked, playing along. "Well, we'd need about $40,000 for equipment, renovation, initial setup costs. With your credit and income, you'd easily qualify for the financing. We'd split the profits, make you a full partner in the expanded practice. $40,000. Exactly the amount of Cillian's gambling debt. That's a significant investment. Dad, I'd need to see business plans. Financial projections, legal documentation." A pause. They hadn't expected me to ask for proof of their fake business plan. Of course. We're still putting all that together. But we wanted to gauge your interest first. This could be huge for the family, Seamus. A real legacy business. They were trying to manipulate my emotions, appeal to some fantasy of family unity that had never existed. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "It's a big decision, naturally. But don't think too long, son. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring out at Dublin's lights, knowing the trap was set. They thought they'd played me perfectly, appealing to my desire for family inclusion and my financial expertise. What they didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of them since that night I overheard their conspiracy. And I was about to show the most respected veterinarian in County Cork what happened when you tried to exploit the wrong son. The weekend family dinner invitation came exactly as I expected. My mother called Friday afternoon, her voice artificially bright. "Seamus, love, why don't you come home for Sunday dinner? We haven't seen you properly since Nana Bridget's birthday. Your father wants to discuss that business opportunity more, and Cillian's been asking about you." "Cillian asking about me?" "Right. More likely he was anxious about whether their financial exploitation scheme would work. I'll be there, I told her. Time to let them think their plan was succeeding. I drove to Cork on Sunday morning, my phone recording app ready. Ireland allows single-party consent for recording conversations, and I plan to document every attempt at manipulation. The farmhouse looked the same as always, stone walls covered in ivy, fields stretching toward the hills, my father's veterinary clinic attached to the east side. Picture perfect Irish rural life hiding the rot underneath. Cillian was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with a Guinness, looking more relaxed than he should have given his $40,000 debt. My mother fussed over me immediately, setting out tea and her homemade brown bread. "You look thin," she said, the same thing she'd said every visit for 6 years. "Are you eating properly in Dublin?" My father emerged from his clinic, still wearing his veterinary coat, playing the part of the successful rural professional. He clasped my shoulder with that false warmth he'd perfected over the years. "Seamus, good to see you, son. I've been putting together those numbers we discussed." He led me to his office, where he'd apparently spent considerable time creating fake business projections for the Bantry Clinic expansion. The documents looked professional, complete with cost breakdowns, revenue estimates, and partnership agreements. If I hadn't known this was all fabricated to cover Cillian's gambling debt, I might have been impressed by the effort. "As you can see," he said, spreading papers across his desk, "the numbers work beautifully. Western Cork has been underserved veterinary-wise. We'd capture the market immediately." The community ostracism reached Dublin faster than I'd expected. Word travels quickly through Irish networks, and soon colleagues at Bank of Ireland were hearing whispers about Seamus O'Sullivan from County Cork, the ungrateful son who'd abandoned his family, my boss. Patricia Murphy called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. She'd received a call from someone claiming to be concerned about my character, questioning whether someone who'd treat his own family so callously could be trusted. I studied the documents, noting how the $40,000 startup cost was broken down into equipment, renovation, and initial operating capital. Not a word about gambling debts or poker sites. "The timeline seems aggressive," I said, playing my part. "You want to break ground by autumn?" "Exactly. The sooner we move, the better our market position." His eyes gleamed with what he probably thought was entrepreneurial enthusiasm. "With your signature on the loan, we could start immediately." There it was. My signature, my credit, my financial responsibility for Cillian's addiction. "I have to admit, I'm intrigued," I lied smoothly. "This could be exactly the kind of family legacy investment I've been looking for." His face lit up. "Hook, line, and sinker. I knew you'd see the potential, Seamus. You always were the smart one with money. Smart with money. If only he knew how smart I'd actually been this past week, protecting every euro from their scheme." We rejoined my mother and Cillian for Sunday dinner. Roast lamb, roasted vegetables, and conversation carefully steered away from anything controversial. They were all performing their roles perfectly, the loving family excited about their business venture. After dinner, as we sat around the kitchen table, my father made his final pitch. "So, Seamus, what do you think? Ready to become a partner in O'Sullivan Veterinary Services?" I looked around the table at their expectant faces, my mother smiling encouragingly, Cillian trying to look supportive while probably calculating how this would solve his debt crisis, my father, the respected professional who thought he could manipulate his own son. "Let me sleep on it," I said. "I'll have an answer for you soon, very soon. Sooner than they expected and nothing like what they hoped for." I called them Tuesday evening. My father answered on the second ring, eager to hear what he assumed would be my acceptance of their fraudulent business proposal. "Dad, I've made my decision about the Bantry Clinic investment." "Wonderful, son. I knew you'd see the opportunity here. When can you come down to sign the paperwork?" "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice calm and cold. "I know about Cillian's $40,000 gambling debt. I know this entire business proposal is fake. And I know you plan to stick me with paying for his poker addiction." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Seamus, I don't know what you think I heard everything that night at Nana Bridget's birthday. Your conversation with Cillian, your plan to manipulate me emotionally, use my credit rating, exploit my desire for family approval. I heard every single word." Another long pause. "Then family helps family, Seamus. Cillian made mistakes, but he's still your brother." Where was family when I worked 2 jobs through college while you paid for everything for Cillian? Where was family when I built my career from nothing while he lived in your house rent-free? You've never helped me, but now you want to destroy my financial security to bail out his gambling addiction. I could hear my mother crying in the background. Cillian's voice urgent and angry, but I couldn't make out the words. The answer is no, I continued. I will never co-sign a loan, invest in a fake business, or give you access to my finances. I've already secured all my accounts with fraud protection. If you attempt to use my identity or credit in any way, I will press charges without hesitation. You ungrateful, my father began, his professional mask finally slipping. I'm ungrateful? I've spent my entire adult life proving I could succeed without your help. I've never asked you for money, support, or even basic parental approval. But the moment I have something worth taking, you see me as a resource to exploit. My mother took the phone. Seamus, please. We can work this out. Cillian needs to face the consequences of his choices. And you need to understand that I'm no longer available to clean up his messes or fund his lifestyle. Having proven I could stand on my own and protect what I'd built, it was time to make something clear to anyone listening who might be in a similar situation. Now that I had cut them off completely, I thought the veterinarian, who prided himself on helping everyone in County Cork, would just accept defeat and find another way to handle Cillian's gambling problem. But when you back a respected professional into a corner and threaten his reputation, well, desperate people do desperate things. What would you do if your own father started telling the entire community lies about why his successful son suddenly refused to help the family? This conversation is over, I said finally. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize and accept that I will never be your financial backup plan. I hung up, then blocked their numbers. The most respected veterinarian in County Cork had just learned that his responsible son was no longer willing to be responsible for everyone else's mistakes. But I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close. The retaliation started within days. My father wasted no time spreading his version of events throughout County Cork, and his reputation as the region's most trusted veterinarian gave his lies immediate credibility. I learned about his campaign from my friend Roisin, who'd grown up in Clonakilty and still had family connections there. She called me Thursday evening, her voice tight with concern. She told me that my father had been telling everyone that his ungrateful son had abandoned the family business opportunity out of pure selfishness. He painted himself as the disappointed father, trying to include his successful city son in a legitimate veterinary expansion, only to be coldly rejected. According to his narrative, I'd become too good for my rural roots, too proud to help my own family succeed. The story spread like wildfire through the tight-knit farming community. These were people who'd known my father for decades, who trusted him with their animals' lives, who respected his professional judgment. When Dr. Padraig O'Sullivan said his son had betrayed the family, they believed him without question. My mother played her part perfectly, telling anyone who'd listen how heartbroken she was that I'd cut off all contact. She'd raised me with such hope, given me every opportunity, only to watch me turn my back on my own blood. The narrative was masterfully crafted to generate maximum sympathy for them and maximum contempt for me. Cillian, meanwhile, became the tragic victim of his brother's cruelty. My father told people that his younger son was struggling to find his path, and that I'd refused to help mentor him or provide any family support. He omitted the $40,000 gambling debt entirely, instead painting Cillian as a young man in need of guidance that his heartless older brother wouldn't provide. The community response was swift and brutal. Roisin told me that my name had become synonymous with ingratitude and family betrayal in 3 counties. Former neighbors who'd watched me grow up now spoke of me with disgust. The local priest had apparently made veiled references to children who abandoned their parents in his Sunday sermon. What hurt most was learning that even some extended family members had been turned against me. My uncle Seamus, my mother's brother, who'd always been kind to me, apparently told people he was ashamed to share my name. Cousins I'd grown up with were posting social media comments about the importance of family loyalty, clearly aimed at me. My father had done exactly what I'd feared he might do, used his respected position in the community to destroy my reputation and isolate me completely. He'd turned my act of self-protection into evidence of my moral failure, and County Cork had embraced his version of events wholeheartedly. But what the respected veterinarian didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything from the beginning. And I was about to remind him that successful sons who work in financial institutions have resources he'd never considered. The community ostracism reached Dublin faster than I'd expected. Word travels quickly through Irish networks, and soon colleagues at Bank of Ireland were hearing whispers about Seamus O'Sullivan from County Cork, the ungrateful son who'd abandoned his family. My boss, Patricia Murphy, called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. She'd received a call from someone claiming to be concerned about my character, questioning whether someone who'd treat his own family so callously could be trusted with client finances. The caller hadn't identified themselves, but the detailed knowledge of my family situation made the source obvious. Patricia told me she didn't believe the allegations, but that HR required her to document any character concerns raised about employees. She advised me to consider addressing the situation before it affected my professional reputation further. That weekend, I drove to Cork with a specific purpose. Not to reconcile, but to gather evidence. I'd protected my finances, but now I needed to protect my reputation and future career prospects. I started with Roisin's family, who'd known the O'Sullivans for generations. Her Aunt Myre, who ran the local post office, had always been fond of me. When I explained my side of the story and showed her the documentation I'd gathered about Cillian's gambling debts, her expression shifted from confusion to anger. She told me that my father had been borrowing money from several local businesses over the past 6 months, claiming temporary cash flow issues with the veterinary practice. When I showed her the bank records proving Cillian's $40,000 debt, she realized those business expenses had likely been covering gambling losses. From there, I visited 3 more family friends who'd known me since childhood. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial coolness based on my father's lies, followed by shocked recognition of the truth when I presented evidence of the gambling debts and the planned exploitation. Mrs. Kathleen O'Brien, whose farm my father had serviced for 15 years, told me something particularly revealing. She mentioned that my father had asked her husband about getting recommendations for financial advisors in Dublin, claiming he wanted to help Cillian get established in the city. When I explained the real reason he'd been researching my financial connections, her face went pale. By Sunday evening, I had statements from 6 respected community members who now understood what had really happened. More importantly, I'd learned that my father's financial situation was far more precarious than anyone realized. The gambling debt payments he'd been making for Cillian had stretched his own resources thin, and his desperation to exploit me made perfect sense. But the most valuable information came from Tom Fitzgerald, the accountant who'd been handling my father's business finances for a decade. When I approached him with my documentation and explained the situation, he broke his usual professional discretion to warn me about something serious. He told me that my father had been asking detailed questions about inheritance procedures, specifically about what would happen to a son's assets if something happened to him. The timing of these questions, just weeks after I'd cut off contact, sent chills down my spine. The respected veterinarian wasn't just trying to destroy my reputation. He was researching ways to access my wealth even if I remained unwilling to cooperate. And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with disappointed parents anymore. I was dealing with people who saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be harvested by any means necessary. The plot twist came from an unexpected source: my father's own veterinary license records. While researching how to protect myself from further retaliation, I decided to verify something that had been nagging at me about his recent behavior. I contacted the Veterinary Council of Ireland under the pretense of verifying his credentials for a reference check at my bank. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation. My father's veterinary license had been under investigation for the past 8 months. 3 separate complaints had been filed regarding improper billing practices, overcharging for services, and recommending unnecessary procedures to elderly farmers who trusted his judgment implicitly. The investigation had been kept quiet, but the evidence was damning. He'd been systematically overcharging vulnerable clients, particularly older farmers who didn't question his professional recommendations. One complaint involved charging $800 for a routine procedure that should have cost $200. Another detailed how he'd convinced a farmer to authorize expensive treatments for a horse that was already beyond saving, prolonging the animal's suffering for his financial benefit. But the revelation that destroyed me wasn't about his professional misconduct. It was discovering that this had been going on for years, long before Cillian's gambling debts became a crisis. My father hadn't been driven to desperation by his son's addiction. He'd been running a systematic scam on the community that trusted him, and Cillian's debts had simply accelerated his timeline for finding new sources of income. Every story he'd told me about building the family business, every lecture about responsibility and character, every guilt trip about helping family, all of it had been coming from a man who was stealing from his own clients. The respected veterinarian of County Cork was nothing but a sophisticated con artist who happened to have legitimate medical credentials. I realized that his plan to exploit me wasn't desperate parenting. It was calculated strategy. He'd been grooming me my entire life to be his backup plan, the successful son whose assets could cover his eventual exposure. My work ethic, my financial success, my desperate desire for family approval, all of it had been part of his long-term insurance policy. The community that had turned against me for refusing to help my family was the same community he'd been systematically defrauding for years. The farmers who called me ungrateful were the same people he'd been overcharging for veterinary services. The neighbors who questioned my character were subsidizing my father's lifestyle and my brother's gambling addiction through inflated veterinary bills. When I confronted him with this information, his response was chilling. He told me that everyone in business cut corners, that his clients could afford the extra charges, that he'd provided excellent service regardless of his billing practices. But then he said something that revealed the true depth of his manipulation. He reminded me that as his son, I could be held liable for his business debts if anything happened to him. That's when I understood the full scope of what I'd escaped. My father hadn't just been planning to exploit my credit for Cillian's gambling debts. He'd been positioning me to become financially responsible for his own professional fraud when it eventually caught up with him. The family business opportunity, the partnership agreements, the legal documentation he'd prepared, all of it had been designed to make me legally and financially entangled with his criminal enterprise. I thought I was protecting myself from a $40,000 loan. Instead, I'd narrowly avoided becoming the fall guy for decades of veterinary fraud that could have destroyed everything I'd built. Armed with the truth about my father's veterinary fraud, I faced a choice that would define who I became: expose him and destroy my family completely, or stay silent and let him continue victimizing the community that had turned against me. The decision should have been obvious. These were people who'd believed his lies about me without question, who'd condemned me based on his manipulative narrative. Part of me wanted to watch them discover they'd been defending a criminal who'd been stealing from them for years. But I wasn't ready to become the person who destroys entire families, even families that had tried to destroy me first. Instead, I chose a different path, one that would protect the community, while still holding my father accountable. Compiled all the evidence of his veterinary billing fraud and sent it anonymously to the Veterinary Council of Ireland, along with detailed financial records showing the connection between his overcharging patterns and Cillian's gambling debt payments. I made sure the investigation would proceed without my name attached, protecting myself from further retaliation while ensuring justice for his victims. Within 3 weeks, my father's veterinary license was suspended pending a full audit of his practice. The news spread through County Cork like wildfire. The respected Dr. Padraig O'Sullivan was under investigation for defrauding the very farmers who trusted him with their animals' lives. The community response was swift and brutal. Farmers who'd been defending him against his ungrateful son suddenly realized they'd been victims of his criminal enterprise. Neighbors who'd questioned my character started asking uncomfortable questions about their own veterinary bills from the past few years. My mother called me, crying hysterically, begging me to somehow fix the situation. She told me that my father was facing potential criminal charges, that their reputation was destroyed, that Cillian was having panic attacks about the family's exposure. She pleaded with me to use my connections at Bank of Ireland to help them find a way out of their legal troubles. The irony was perfect. After months of trying to exploit my financial resources, they now wanted to exploit my professional connections to escape the consequences of their own actions. Even facing criminal investigation, They still saw me primarily as a resource to be utilized for their benefit. I told my mother that I'd had nothing to do with the veterinary investigation, which was technically true. I also told her that I wouldn't be providing any assistance, financial, professional, or otherwise, to help them avoid accountability for their choices. But the revelation that hurt most came from Cillian himself. He contacted me through a mutual friend, not to apologize, but to blame me for everything that had happened to our family. He told people that if I'd just agreed to help with his debts initially, none of this would have been necessary. He painted my refusal to be exploited as the catalyst for our father's desperate measures and eventual exposure. Even facing the collapse of everything they'd built, my family still couldn't accept responsibility for their own actions. They'd rather blame the son who'd protected himself than acknowledge the choices that had led to their downfall. I realized that no matter what happened, I would always be the villain in their version of events. Not because of what I'd done, but because I'd refused to be victimized. The respected veterinarian's son had become the family scapegoat, and I was finally at peace with that role. 6 months later, my father's veterinary license was permanently revoked. He faced criminal charges for fraud, and the civil lawsuits from defrauded farmers would likely consume whatever assets remained after legal fees. The O'Sullivan family name, once synonymous with respect and trust in County Cork, became associated with betrayal and criminal exploitation. Cillian's gambling addiction, no longer subsidized by veterinary fraud, spiraled completely out of control. He'd apparently borrowed money from dangerous people to continue playing online poker, and when my father's income disappeared, those debts became impossible to manage. Last I heard, he'd fled to London to escape creditors who'd made physical threats. My mother lost the farm. Without my father's veterinary income and facing mounting legal bills, she couldn't maintain the mortgage payments on the property that had been in our family for 3 generations. She moved into a small flat in Cork City, working at a grocery store to pay rent, a shadow of the woman who'd once been the veterinarian's respected wife. The community that had condemned me for abandoning my family gradually learned the truth about what I'd actually escaped. Several farmers approached mutual friends to ask how they could contact me, wanting to apologize for believing my father's lies and condemning me without hearing my side of the story. But the apologies felt hollow. These people had been willing to destroy my reputation based on one man's word, without questioning his motives or seeking my perspective. They'd learned I was innocent not through careful consideration, but through the dramatic exposure of my father's crimes. Their regret was based on being wrong, not on treating me unfairly. I never returned to County Cork. The farmhouse I'd grown up in was sold to pay legal fees, and the clinic where my father had built his reputation was shuttered permanently. Sometimes I drive past the turnoff for Clonakilty on my way to other parts of Ireland, but I never take that exit. My career at Bank of Ireland flourished once the cloud of family scandal settled. Patricia Murphy told me she'd learned valuable lessons about not believing character assassination attempts, and my handling of the situation had actually impressed senior management. I was promoted twice in the following year, establishing myself as someone who could maintain professional integrity under personal pressure. Look, if you're still listening to this, you probably know what it feels like to be seen as a bank account instead of a son. Subscribe if you want to hear more confessions from people who chose financial survival over family loyalty. Hit that notification bell because the veterinarian's son stories don't end here. And honestly, I need to know, if your own father was defrauding the community while planning to stick you with your brother's gambling debts, would you have let him destroy those farmers' lives to protect the family reputation? The community eventually rebuilt its trust in veterinary services through new practitioners who actually served their clients honestly. The farmers recovered from their financial losses and learned to be more cautious about professional recommendations. County Cork moved on from the O'Sullivan scandal and forgot about the veterinarian's son who'd refused to be exploited. But sometimes I wonder if I became exactly what they accused me of being. The cold, calculating son who destroyed his own family. Maybe protecting yourself from people who see you as nothing more than a resource requires becoming someone they can't manipulate. Maybe that was always the real choice.